Some women get flowers on their anniversary. Nia Holloway got a confession. 4 years of her life, her savings, her loyalty, her future, handed over to a man who looked her dead in the eyes and told her he was leaving for someone younger. 3 weeks later, still bleeding from that wound, she walked into the most exclusive gala in Chicago and collided with the most dangerous man alive. Not a CEO, not a senator, a mafia boss. And the moment Kang Min-jae looked at her, something shifted in the air between them that neither of them would ever be able to take back. If you've been cheated on, left behind, or told you weren't enough, this story is for you. Watch until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The reservation had been for 7 o'clock. Nia Holloway had arrived at 6:45 because that was who she was. Early, prepared, flowers already on the table. The corner booth at Rosalind's already paid for because she knew Derek hated splitting anything in public, and she had learned years ago that it was easier to just handle it herself. The candles were those tall ivory ones that dripped wax if you left them burning too long. She had requested them specifically because Derek once mentioned, 2 Christmases ago, that he liked the way candlelight looked on dark wood. She had remembered that. She remembered everything. She was wearing the burgundy dress, the one with the open back and the thin gold clasp at the nape of her neck. She had bought it 3 weeks ago and hidden it in the back of her closet like a secret, waiting for tonight. Her hair was pinned up on one side, loose on the other, the way you used to reach across pillows in the morning and push it back from her face and say she looked like a painting. She had not eaten all day, so her stomach would sit flat under the fabric. She had practiced what she was going to say during the taxi ride over, moving her lips slightly against the window glass without making a sound, the driver pretending not to notice. 4 years. She had a card in her clutch that said 4 years feels like the beginning because she had meant it when she wrote it, sitting at her kitchen table at midnight with the handwriting she saved for things that mattered. Derek arrived at 7:18. He sat down across from her and did not comment on the candles or the dress or the flowers. He ordered a whiskey before he said anything at all. She watched him turn the glass in his hands the way he did when he was building up to something, rotating it slowly counterclockwise, and she told herself she was imagining it. She told herself he was just tired. She asked him how his day had been. He said it was fine. She asked if he was hungry. He said not really. He drank half the whiskey, and then he looked at her and said it. He didn't say it gently. There was no softening around the edges, no careful architecture of words designed to cushion the impact. He just said it, that he had been seeing someone else for 7 months, that it wasn't something he planned, that she was 24 and worked in his building and it had just kind of happened, that he was sorry, that he knew the timing was bad, that he hoped they could eventually be civil. Nia heard the words in pieces, the way sound sometimes fragments when a car passes too fast on wet pavement. She heard seeing someone, and then 7 months, and then something about the timing, and she sat very still with her hands flat on the table and her eyes on the candle flame, because if she looked at his face, she was going to fall apart in the middle of Rosalind's on their anniversary, while the couple 2 tables over were ordering dessert. She did not fall apart. She said, "Okay." He blinked. "Okay?" "I heard you," she said. She put money on the table for the flowers because she had brought them from her own apartment, and she was not leaving them for whoever came to clear the booth after them. She picked up her clutch. She stood up, and she did not smooth the back of her dress the way she usually did out of habit, and she walked out through the front door and stood on the sidewalk in the November cold without her coat because she had left it on the back of the chair and she was not going back inside. She stood there for 4 minutes. Then she called a car and went home. She did not cry in the car. She did not cry when she got upstairs and hung the burgundy dress back in the closet. She did not cry when she took the card out of her clutch and set it on the kitchen counter and stood looking at her own handwriting. 4 years feels like the beginning. Until the letters blurred. She cried at 2 in the morning, sitting on the bathroom floor with her back against the tub and her knees pulled to her chest. And it was the kind of crying that doesn't make much noise but takes everything out of you. The kind where you open your mouth and nothing comes out but air, and your whole ribcage convulses like something is trying to escape from the inside. She was 31 years old. She had an interior design firm she had built from nothing, a client list that was finally starting to mean something, a 5-year plan that had Derek in it at every significant marker. She had turned down a project in Dubai because the timeline conflicted with a vacation they were supposed to take together to Portugal. She had done that without even thinking about it, the way you do things when you assume someone is permanent. She was on the bathroom floor at 2 in the morning on her anniversary, and she was 31 years old and she had turned down Dubai. She stayed on the floor until the cold tiles made her legs ache. Then she got up, washed her face, drank 2 glasses of water standing over the sink, and went to bed. She had 3 client calls the next morning. She did not cancel any of them. The 3 weeks that followed were the kind of weeks that hollowed you out in increments. Not dramatically, not all at once, just slowly, like water wearing through stone. Each morning you woke up and remembered all over again, and the remembering got slightly less violent but never stopped entirely. And you went through the motions of your life wearing the whole thing like a coat you couldn't take off. She redesigned a townhouse in Lincoln Park. She went to the gym 4 times because the trainer had said cardio helped with stress, and she needed to do something with her hands. She called her mother once and said she was fine when asked, and her mother said she didn't sound fine, and Nia said she had to get back to a client. She did not tell her friends for the first 2 weeks because telling them would make it real in a way she wasn't ready for, and also because Priya would want to immediately launch into what did he do wrong analysis, and Camille would want to go out and get drunk, and Nia was not capable of either of those things yet. She went through her phone on a Saturday morning and deleted the Portugal trip research she had bookmarked. Flights, hotels, a restaurant someone had recommended near Alfama. She deleted all of it systematically, screen by screen, the same way she approached any project, methodically, without letting herself stop in the middle. She found the savings account on a Wednesday. She had not been checking it. She and Derek had a joint account that they had opened 18 months ago, originally for the Portugal Fund, and it had evolved into something more than that. A general we account, money pooled for shared expenses, and Nia had been depositing regularly because she made more than him, and she hadn't minded. It was not a small amount. It was the kind of amount that had taken her years to build, the kind that represented a second office, the kind that represented options. She opened the app on a Wednesday afternoon between client calls, and the balance was $412. She sat at her desk and read the number 3 times. Then she pulled the transaction history and went through it line by line. The withdrawals started 8 months ago. Small at first, $200 or $300. The kind of amounts that don't register as alarming if you're not watching closely. Then larger. Then much larger. The last withdrawal had been made 11 days ago, 4 days before he left her at the restaurant, and it was significant enough that she felt it physically, a cold drop in her chest like something falling. She called her bank. She called Derek. He did not pick up. She texted him, and he responded 2 hours later saying he had meant to talk to her about that. She texted back asking him to call her, and he did not. She called again. He did not pick up. She called a 3rd time, and he picked up and said he had debts she didn't know about, and he had needed the money, and he was sorry. He was going to pay it back. He needed some time. She said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "Don't contact me again." She hung up and put her phone face down on the desk and sat there with her hands in her lap and breathed through her nose for approximately 90 seconds. Then she called her lawyer. The invitation to the Blackstone Charity Gala arrived the following day, which was either impeccable timing or the universe being perverse. She hadn't decided which. She almost declined it. She was in no state for a gala. She had dark circles she was covering with concealer, and a tension headache that had been living behind her left eye for 6 days, and the financial situation was actively being handled by her lawyer, but was not yet resolved, which meant every time she sat still too long, she started doing math in her head. A room full of Chicago's wealthy elite was the last place she wanted to be. But the Blackstone Gala was not just a social event. It was the kind of room where careers moved. It was the kind of room where a designer with Nia's portfolio could spend 4 hours and walk out with 2 or 3 serious leads. She had been trying to get on the invite list for 2 years. The invitation had come through a client who knew someone who knew someone. And if she didn't go, there was no guarantee she would ever get another. She had nothing left to lose by going. She had, in fact, considerably less than she'd had 3 weeks ago. She RSVP'd yes. She wore black. Not the strategic black of someone trying to be elegant, but the black of someone who was not in the mood to make choices about color. She wore the earrings that were too expensive for most events, and heels she had broken in over a year so they didn't hurt. She did her own makeup because she was not paying for a makeup artist on top of everything else. And she did it well, because she was a professional and she was good with aesthetic, and her face showed nothing of the previous 3 weeks if she didn't let it. The Blackstone Hotel ballroom was exactly what she had expected. High ceilings, crystal, the particular quality of air that accumulates in rooms where a lot of money has gathered in a small space. She got a glass of champagne she didn't particularly want and moved through the room the way you do when you're networking, and also slightly numb, looking for faces she recognized, calculating who was worth approaching. She was crossing the room toward a woman she recognized from a magazine profile, a real estate developer who had been profiled for commissioning a major residential project in the South Loop when she collided with him. It wasn't graceful. The champagne went. Not entirely, but enough. It hit the sleeve of the suit the man was wearing, and the suit was the kind of suit that made you immediately aware that the champagne was a problem, and she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I wasn't," and looked up. The man was looking at her, not at the champagne, not at his sleeve, at her. He was Korean, maybe early 40s, with the kind of stillness in his face that Nia associated with people who had learned long ago not to telegraph what they were thinking. His features were angular and precise, and he was very tall. Tall enough that looking up at him required a slight adjustment. His suit was charcoal, the champagne spreading slowly into the fabric at the cuff, and he had not moved to dab at it or look down at it or do any of the things a normal person does when a woman spills champagne on them at a gala. He was just looking at her. "I'm sorry," she said again, because his silence was doing something to the air between them that she didn't have a word for. "Your sleeve. I should have been watching where I was going." "It's a gala," he said. His voice was low and unhurried. "Someone always spills something." He had an accent, slight, English-trained rather than purely American, precise in the consonants in a way that suggested he had been speaking it for a long time in formal contexts. She almost walked away. She would think about that later. She was right there at the edge of walking away. She had already begun to angle her shoulder, already forming the exit smile, the small, polite nod, when a man across the room called out, and the crowd shifted, and Derek Vaughn walked into her direct line of sight. He was with her. The girl. 24, the way he had said, meaning it as a descriptor and not a judgment. And Nia had pictured someone generic, someone interchangeable, and instead she was looking at someone who laughed easily and stood close and was wearing a dress the same color as the one Nia had left folded in her closet 3 weeks ago. They had not noticed her yet. Nia had exactly 2 seconds to decide what to do with her face. She did not run. She did not turn away fast enough to make it obvious. She held her ground by the sheer biological stubbornness of someone who had grown up learning that you did not let people see you bleed in public. The man beside her, still there, she realized, still holding the champagne-stained sleeve with the same complete absence of agitation, said, without looking at where she was looking, "Someone just walked in who you'd rather not see." It wasn't a question. She looked back at him. His eyes were on her, not on the crowd. Dark, very steady. The kind of eyes that didn't need to look around to take in a room because they had already done that before most people finished finding their seats. "I'm fine," she said. "I didn't say you weren't," she breathed. "He's my ex. He's here with—" She stopped. "I'm fine." The man beside her said nothing. He reached to a passing waiter's tray and exchanged his champagne glass for a fresh one and held it out to her. Her own glass was still in her hand, slightly depleted, and she looked at the one he was offering, and something in the gesture was so unexpectedly simple that she felt the back of her throat tighten. She took it. "Thank you," she said. I don't know your name." "No," he agreed. She waited. He did not elaborate. Across the room, Derek had spotted her. She saw it happen. The small hitch in his movement, the way his hand on the girl's back stiffened fractionally. He was going to come over. She could see it in the tilt of his chin, the calculation, the way he was probably already constructing something to say that would let him feel magnanimous. She straightened her back. She lifted her chin by approximately 3 millimeters, which was the amount required to make the shift visible to someone watching. The man beside her watched her do it. Derek crossed the room. He was smiling the way he smiled when he needed to manage something. "Nia." "Hey, I didn't know you were going to be here." "Hello, Derek. You look good." "Thank you." The girl was beside him now, and she had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, which Nia gave her credit for. Derek put his hand on the girl's lower back and said, "This is Chloe. Chloe, this is Nia. He hesitated on the verb. Nia watched him struggle with it. "We know each other," Nia said flatly, because she was not going to help him with the sentence. Derek's eyes moved to the man beside her. The shift was almost imperceptible, but Nia caught it. The slight widening, then the rapid recalibration, something moving through Derek's expression that she hadn't seen before. It wasn't just social recognition. It was something closer to wariness. "I'm Kang Min Jae," the man beside her said, and he said it in the tone of someone who is not introducing themselves because they expect it to mean something. He was introducing himself the way you state a fact, but it clearly meant something to Derek because the confidence he'd walked over with had drained by a visible degree. He shook Min Jae's hand and said it was great to meet him, and the words came out with less certainty than they'd had 30 seconds ago. "She's exceptional, you know," Min Jae said then, and the casualness of it was so complete that it took a moment for Nia to understand he was talking about her. "Your loss." Derek's jaw worked. He said something polite and retreated, taking Chloe with him, and Nia stood very still beside this man she had met 14 minutes ago and did not know whether to laugh or to be furious or to say thank you. She said, "You didn't have to do that." "No," he agreed again. "I don't need—" "I know," he said. "I didn't say you did." She looked at him. He was looking out at the room again now, perfectly composed, holding his new glass of champagne with the same ease he held everything, apparently, which was the ease of someone who has never in his life felt out of place in a room. "Why did you then?" she asked. He turned to look at her, and there was something in his face that she couldn't read clearly. Not warmth exactly, not attraction, something more careful than either of those things. Like someone observing a structural detail in architecture and deciding it is more significant than it appears. "Because," he said, "you weren't going to break, even though you wanted to, and that deserved acknowledgement." Nia Holloway stood in the Blackstone ballroom with a champagne glass in her hand and looked at a man she didn't know and felt something shift in the air between them that she was absolutely unprepared for, and she thought, "This is not good. This is going to complicate things." She was right about that. She did not see him again that night. The rest of the gala went by the way those things do when you're not really present. She shook hands. She spoke intelligently about her work. She collected 2 business cards that might become something and one that almost certainly wouldn't, and she did not look for him in the crowd again because she had learned in the last 3 weeks that looking for things was a dangerous habit. She thought about what he had said on the taxi ride home, the way he had said it, not as reassurance, not as flattery, but as observation. You weren't going to break, even though you wanted to, like he had seen something she hadn't given him permission to see and was simply reporting back on what it was. She went home and took off the earrings and the heels and sat in her kitchen with a glass of water and thought about the money. The money was the immediate problem. The financial hole left by Derek was significant, and her lawyer was working on it. But these things took time, and in the meantime she had a firm to run and payroll to make. And she was not going to ask her mother, and she was not going to ask Priya, and she was absolutely not going to let this thing sink her when she had built it from nothing. She went to bed and did not sleep well and woke up at 5:15 because her brain decided 5:15 was when it wanted to present the entire situation as a list of unresolved items. She made coffee and sat at her drafting table and opened the client file she'd been working on. The Hendersons. A brownstone in Wicker Park that needed a complete interior overhaul. She pulled the mood board and looked at it and started making notes in the margin in the small, tight handwriting she used when she was thinking fast. And for 40 minutes, she forgot about everything else. The email arrived at 9:07. The subject line was, "Design Inquiry, Private Residence, Seoul." She almost deleted it. Unsolicited design inquiries came through her website contact form, not direct emails, and the fact that this one had found her professional address meant someone had done some looking. She opened it anyway. It was brief. A representative, but not Min Jae himself, she noted, a representative, wrote to say that a client was seeking a designer for a private penthouse renovation in Seoul, South Korea. The scope was significant. The timeline was tight. Work to begin within the month. The budget was, per the email, not a limiting factor. References to her specific portfolio had been included, 2 projects cited by name, which meant whoever had done the research had looked at her work carefully enough to know which projects represented what she could actually do rather than just what had gotten the most press. At the bottom, if you are interested in discussing further, please respond to confirm and a call will be arranged. She read it 3 times. She knew, even before she responded, whose penthouse it was. She sat with that knowledge for 22 minutes by the clock on her drafting table. She thought about Seoul. She thought about the financial reality of her situation and the number in her bank account and the fact that her lawyer had said recovery from what Derek had done would take time, the particular kind of time that costs money while it runs. She thought about the man in the charcoal suit and the thing he had said about her not breaking. She thought about how dangerous it was to take a job from a man she had met for 14 minutes at a gala and whom she already knew, from the way Derek's face had changed, was not someone to take lightly. She thought about Dubai and how she had turned it down without blinking. She responded at 9:29. Yes, I'm interested in discussing further. Please send availability for a call. She pressed send before she could think too long about it, and then she sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling and thought, this is either the best decision or the worst decision. There is no middle option here. The call happened 2 days later. It was not Min Jae on the call. It was a man named Park Jun-ho, who identified himself as Min Jae's chief of operations, which was not a title she had expected from a residential renovation project. He was efficient and precise and spoke excellent English and outlined the scope of the project in terms that made her pick up a pen within the first minute. The penthouse was 4,200 square feet on the top floor of a private tower in Gangnam, Seoul. It had been acquired 8 months ago. It had been used as a workspace and temporary residence, but had never been designed for living, which was how Park Jun-ho described it. Not cold, not neglected, never designed for living. She would understand the distinction, he said when she saw it. The scope she was being asked to take on was complete. Every room, every surface. The existing furniture was largely to be removed. She would have design authority, within certain parameters, that he would outline in more detail on site. The timeline was aggressive, but 3 months to a livable primary space, 4 to completion. There would be a local project manager assigned to her, a team of contractors she could direct, and a personal assistant for the duration of her stay. Her stay. She had not said she would be going to Seoul. She said, I'd need to be on site for the duration. Yes, Park Jun-ho said. That is understood. Accommodations will be provided in the tower. Your Chicago projects can continue remotely if you need to maintain them. The client understands this would be an adjustment. She asked about the design parameters he had mentioned. He said there were rooms she would not be given access to and structural elements she would not be asked to touch. Her scope was clear. Living spaces, common areas, the private study, the kitchen, the primary suite, and guest rooms. The secure floors of the tower were not part of the project. She held the phone and looked at her desk and thought, secure floors. She said, who is the client? Officially, a pause. Kang Min Jae is the owner of KM Holdings, a privately held development company, with holdings across real estate, logistics, and technology sectors across Asia and internationally. The penthouse is his primary personal residence. She said, I know who he is publicly, Mr. Park. That's not what I asked. Another pause. Slightly longer. The client values discretion, Park Jun-ho said carefully. As do we. The same discretion would be extended to you and your work in both directions. It was not an answer. It was also a very specific kind of not answer. She thought about the way Derek had looked at him across the Blackstone ballroom, the widening of the eyes, the involuntary step back. She said, what is the compensation structure? He told her. She wrote the number on the notepad in front of her and looked at it for 3 seconds. It was almost precisely the amount that had been taken from the joint account, plus 40%. She did not ask if that was deliberate. She suspected it was. She suspected that was the kind of detail someone like Min Jae factored in without needing to be asked. She said, I'll need 10 days to arrange my existing client commitments before I can travel. Of course, Park Jun-ho said. The client will confirm a start date. She hung up and sat very still in her studio apartment and thought about what she had just agreed to and decided, as she had decided 3 weeks ago on a bathroom floor, that she was not going to fall apart. She was going to do the work. She was going to do it exceptionally well, and she was going to get paid and she was going to come home. That was the plan. She was, in a number of significant ways, wrong about how the plan would go. Well, Seoul in January was not Chicago cold. It was a different kind of cold, drier and sharper, a cold that came off the Han River and moved through the streets with intention. Nia had done research on the flight over, 12 hours from O'Hare, business class, which she had not booked herself. And she had brought the right coat, but still felt the temperature differently than she expected when she stepped out of the private car at the tower. The building was not flashy. That was the first thing she noticed. In a district full of architectural statements, the tower Min Jae owned was understated. Dark glass and black steel, maybe 40 stories, nothing announcing itself, no signage at street level beyond a small engraved plate. The kind of building that did not need to announce itself because the people who needed to know what it was already knew. There was a man at the door who was not a doorman. He was large and stood with the particular stillness of someone with specific training, and he looked at her and then at the driver who had brought her, and something passed between them that did not require words, and the door opened. The lobby was clean and severe. Marble floors, a front desk with two people who were clearly not hotel staff, no art on the walls, no decorative choices at all. Functional. Watchful. The elevator required a card and a code. Park Joon-ho met her at the 38th floor. He was younger than she had imagined from the phone, mid-30s, wire-framed glasses, and a fitted suit, and the contained energy of someone who had learned to be the most organized person in every room they entered because it was required. He shook her hand with professional precision and walked her down a hallway and then unlocked the door to the penthouse floor. She stepped in and understood immediately what he had meant. Never designed for living. It was magnificent. The scale was right. 4,200 square feet at the top of a tower with floor-to-ceiling glass on three sides and a view of Seoul that was, at 3 p.m. in January, the most striking thing she had ever seen. The bones were extraordinary, the ceiling height, the proportions, the way the light came through the southeast-facing windows in the late afternoon. But it was completely empty of warmth. Not because it lacked furniture, there was furniture, expensive and precisely placed, but because nothing in the space indicated that a human being lived there. No objects on surfaces, no reading material, no throws or cushions or rugs or anything soft. The art on the walls was abstract and tasteful and generic, the kind selected by a purchasing department with a budget rather than by a person with a point of view. The kitchen was fully equipped and looked like it had never been used. The primary suite had a bed with white hotel-quality linens changed on schedule by someone who would never be remembered. It was a headquarters, an address, a fortress. It was not a home. She stood in the center of the main living area with her hands on the strap of her bag and turned slowly, taking it in, and thought, I can fix this. I know exactly what this needs. And then, this man does not know how to live in a space. And then, that is not your business, Nia. He'll meet with you at 6, Park Joon-ho said from behind her. He's here? She had not expected that. She had expected the kind of client who communicates through intermediaries. He returned from Tokyo this morning. Park Joon-ho said it the way people say things that are not particularly noteworthy. He prefers to brief contractors personally on new projects. She was not a contractor, but she did not correct him. At 6 o'clock, Min Jae walked into the living area where she had been working for 2 hours with her measuring tape and her notebook, and she looked up, and there he was. More real than the 14 minutes at the gala had made him seem, less formal, wearing a dark shirt without a tie, and with the particular quality of presence that she had registered the first time and was now registering again. The kind of presence that does not fill a room by being loud. The kind that makes the room rearrange itself around the person. He looked at the notebook in her hands, at the measuring tape on the floor where she had left it, at the 2 pages of preliminary notes she had spread on the coffee table. You started without the briefing, he said. I work better if I have first impressions before I know what someone wants, she said. First impressions are cleaner. He considered this. Then, what are your first impressions? Do you want the diplomatic version or the accurate one? Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but the movement adjacent to one. The accurate one. She told him. She told him the bones were extraordinary, and the decisions that had been made since were criminally generic, and she used the word criminally without thinking about it, and then thought about it, and he did not react, and she kept going. She told him the lighting was wrong for the space, functional rather than inhabitable. She told him whoever had selected the art had been operating from a budget rather than a point of view, and it showed. She told him the kitchen layout was correct, but the materials were cold, and the small choices that make a kitchen feel used rather than aspirational had been ignored entirely. She told him it didn't feel like anyone lived there. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's correct?" She had expected him to push back on something. She said, "When was the last time someone asked your opinion on how you actually want to live in a space? Not what's practical, not what's secure, what you actually want." He looked at her for a moment before he answered, and she had the distinct sense that she had asked something he hadn't been asked before, which was strange because it seemed like a basic question. "I don't have an answer to that," he said finally. "That's where we start then," she said. Min-jae stood in the center of his own penthouse and looked at the woman who had just told him his fortress was not a home, and she could not read his expression clearly enough to know whether she had pushed too far. Then he said, "Have you eaten?" She had not. The flight had been fine, but the day had moved fast. "There's food being brought up at 7, he said, and walked toward the office wing, and Nia stood alone in the middle of the empty living room and realized that was apparently the end of the briefing. She looked at her notebook, at the 2 pages of first impressions. She thought, "This is going to be a more complicated 3 months than you planned for." She was right about that too. But what she did not know, on that first evening in the tower, was that 11 floors below the penthouse, in a room without windows that did not appear on any building schematic she would ever be shown, a conversation was happening about her. 2 men. One was Park Jun-ho. The other was a man named Yoon Dae-sung, who handled security and other matters for which there was no official title, and who had been with Min-jae since before the organization became what it now was. Yoon Dae-sung was looking at a file. The file had Nia Holloway's photograph on it, her professional history, her financial situation, current, precise, including the exact amount that had been taken from the joint account and the status of the legal recovery effort, her apartment address in Chicago, her client list, her relationship history, truncated to the relevant recent period, her mother's name, her college education, her health records. He said, "She's clean." Park Jun-ho said, "Yes." "Too clean," Yoon said. "Nobody relevant to him has ever been this clean." Park Jun-ho said nothing, which was his way of agreeing. Yoon set the file down. "He brought her here himself. That's not a business decision." "He says it is." "He says a lot of things," Yoon said. He looked at the photograph for another moment, and his expression was not hostile, but it was not warm either. It was the expression of a man running calculations. "How long before the Chongliu people find out about the project?" "If it stays internal," Park Jun-ho said, 2 weeks, maybe 3. "And when they find out there's someone new in the tower?" The room was quiet. "Someone Min-jae is spending time with," Yoon said. "Someone without security, without history, without any reason to be untouchable." Park Jun-ho said quietly, "That's the problem." Yoon Dae-sung picked up the file again and looked at the photograph of a woman who was currently 41 floors above him, spreading her first impressions across a coffee table in a penthouse she was about to transform. "Yes," he said, "that's the problem." And on the 38th floor, Nia Holloway sat at the kitchen counter of a fortress disguised as a home, and wrote in her notebook and did not know that she had already, without choosing to, become the most dangerous kind of variable in a world that ran on the elimination of variables. The door to the office wing opened. Min-jae came back into the room and said the food had arrived and he had ordered Korean, and if she had preferences, she should have mentioned them earlier. She said Korean was fine. They sat at opposite ends of the table with the Seoul skyline blazing through the glass behind him, and it was the most ordinary and also the most charged meal she had ever eaten, and she told herself it was jet lag making everything feel more significant than it was. She told herself that. But somewhere below them, in a room that did not exist on any schematic, Yoon Dae-sung was picking up a phone, and 600 kilometers away, in a city that was not Seoul, a man who was not a friend was beginning to pay attention. The food was galbi and doenjang jigae, and a small plate of banchan that someone had arranged with the kind of precision that suggested the person who arranged it had been doing it for years without being asked. Nia ate carefully at first, not because she was uncertain about the food, but because she was uncertain about the silence. And the silence between them was not uncomfortable exactly, but it had weight to it. The kind of weight that accumulates between two people who have already said more to each other in one ballroom and one briefing than most people say in weeks. Min-jae ate the way he did everything, without hurry, without waste. He picked up his chopsticks and used them with the automatic ease of someone who has never thought about it. And he looked out at the Seoul skyline occasionally, and at her occasionally, and did not try to fill the air with conversation. She had eaten meals with men who could not tolerate silence. Derek had been one of them. He filled every quiet gap with commentary, opinions, anecdotes that were really just auditions for her attention. It had taken her years to realize that was not the same thing as actual presence. Min-jae was present without performing it, and that was something she was not prepared for. She said, "How long have you had the tower?" "I own the building," he said. 12 years? "The penthouse floor has been mine the whole time." "And you've never had it designed." "I've had it furnished." "That's not the same thing," she said. He looked at her. "No, it isn't." She pushed a piece of galbi through the sauce on her plate. "Can I ask you something that's not about the project?" "You can ask." "At the gala," she said, "you didn't have to say what you said to Derek. You didn't know me. It was 14 minutes. He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone deciding whether to answer, but the silence of someone deciding how accurately to answer. "He was coming over to manage you," Min-jae said. "Like a situation, not a person." "I noticed that." "I know you did," he said. "That's why I said it. You had already decided not to react, but you shouldn't have had to make that decision in the first place." She looked at him across the table, and the Seoul skyline spread out behind him, 40 stories up, and the light was doing something complicated, and she thought, "You are going to be a problem for me." She thought it clearly, and she acknowledged it, and then she picked up her chopsticks again, because acknowledging a problem and solving it were different skills, and right now the immediate task was finishing dinner. "The galbi is good," she said. "My housekeeper makes it," he said. "She's been here 15 years. She'll want to feed you every day you're in the tower. I'm telling you this now so you can manage it before she decides it's a standing arrangement." Nia almost smiled. Almost. "Is she here often?" "Every morning. She leaves by noon." He paused. "She also notices everything, and she has opinions about everything she notices. I mention this as a warning." "About what?" He looked at her steadily. "About the fact that I have never had a designer stay in the tower before. She will draw conclusions." "What kind of conclusions?" "The wrong kind," he said. "Or possibly the right kind. I haven't decided yet." Nia put her chopsticks down. She looked at him very directly, the way she looked at clients when she needed them to understand that she was not going to pretend something wasn't being said. "I'm here to do a job," she said. "I'm good at it. That's what this is." "I know," he said. "I need that to be clear." "It is clear," he said. "I said I hadn't decided yet." "That's not the same as having already decided." She didn't have an answer for that. She was used to men who pushed when they wanted something. She was not used to one who stated the situation with the same neutrality he'd used to give a weather forecast and then simply waited. She picked up her chopsticks again. He looked back out at the skyline. They finished dinner in the same weighted silence they had started it in, and when the food was cleared by someone who appeared soundlessly and disappeared the same way, Nia went back to her section of the penthouse, a guest suite that was large and impersonal and had, she noted, a connecting door to a hallway that led nowhere useful, and sat on the edge of the bed and breathed. Her phone had 3 messages from Priya asking how Seoul was. One from her mother saying she should have called when she landed. One from her lawyer with a status update that was professionally worded but essentially said things were moving slowly. She answered Priya with a photo of the view from her window and a thumbs up. She called her mother back and said she had landed fine, and the project was starting, and she would call more when she had a rhythm. She read the lawyer's email 3 times, and then put her phone face down on the nightstand. She lay back on the bed in her clothes and looked at the ceiling of Min-jae's tower and thought about the 11 floors below her that Park Joon-ho had not explained, and the file that Yoon Dae-sung had been looking at, which she did not know about, and the man who had said, "I haven't decided yet," like it was a reasonable thing to say to a woman who was here to redesign his kitchen. She thought, "You need to be very careful, Nia Holloway." She went to sleep 40 minutes later with the lights still on, and did not dream. The first 2 weeks moved the way project beginnings always moved, in a controlled chaos of measurements and material samples and contractor walkthroughs and decisions made and then remade because the first decision revealed something about the space you hadn't understood yet. She was good at this part. She had always been good at the part where there was so much to do that there was no room to think about anything else. The local project manager assigned to her was a woman named Seo Hyun-ji, 35, with the energy of someone who had managed construction in Seoul long enough to have no patience for delays or excuses. They did not immediately like each other. They figured each other out over the first week with the particular efficiency of two professionals who recognize competence and decide to work with it regardless of personal chemistry. Hyun-ji spoke 4 languages and took notes in 2 simultaneously, and had an opinion about every contractor she'd ever worked with, organized into a mental ranking system she shared freely. By day 4, Nia had started coming to her for vendor recommendations instead of looking herself, because Hyunji's recommendations were always right, and the reasoning was always practical. "That tile supplier," Hyunji said one morning, standing in the kitchen with her tablet and a coffee she had already drunk half of. "The one you're looking at for the primary bath. The samples are good, but the lead time is 6 weeks. You want 4 weeks. Go with Park Materials instead. The finish is 92% as good and the lead time is 3. 92% is not 100%. No, but 3 weeks instead of 6 is 100%. Nia looked at her. Then she changed the supplier on the order. Min-jae was present in the building most days, but visible only sometimes. He kept a schedule that she didn't have access to, which was not a surprise but was occasionally inconvenient because she needed answers on certain decisions, and Park Jun-ho, for all his efficiency, consistently deferred to Min-jae on anything beyond the operational. The kitchen countertop material, marble versus honed limestone, required Min-jae's sign-off because of something about the weight load on the custom cabinetry below it that the contractor had flagged. She requested a 15-minute meeting. She got 20 minutes, late in the evening, and Min-jae looked at the samples she had laid out on the floor with the same careful attention he apparently gave everything. He chose the limestone without hesitation. "Marble marks," he said. "Most people prefer the look regardless." "Most people don't spend time in their kitchens," he said. She looked up from the samples. "You cook?" He paused. "Occasionally, badly." "Why do you keep doing it if you're bad at it?" The pause this time was longer. He was looking at the limestone sample. "Because being bad at something in private is different from being bad at something in public." She wrote down limestone in her notebook and said, "That's actually a good reason." He looked at her sideways. "You sound surprised." "I'm not surprised. I'm noting it." He stayed for the full 20 minutes. Then he stayed for another 10 and asked 2 questions about the living room layout that were more specific than she expected. Not the broad strokes of a client approving a direction, but the specific questions of someone who had looked at the plans carefully and noticed details. He asked about the depth of the sofa she had specified. He asked whether the secondary seating would allow 2 people to have a conversation without the main piece interfering. She answered both questions, and he listened without interrupting. When he left, she stood in the kitchen with the limestone sample in her hand and thought, "He's been looking at the plans. He's been thinking about what it would mean to actually use the space." That was new. That was something different from 12 years of treating the penthouse as an address. She did not know what to do with that. Yoon Dae-sung appeared in her workspace on a Thursday morning in the 3rd week. She had not been formally introduced to him. She knew him from peripheral awareness, the way you know certain people in a building. She had seen him in the lobby twice, once in the hallway near the elevator, always at a distance and always in motion, and always, she now recognized in retrospect, slightly too aware of where she was relative to him. He came in while she was working alone, Hyunji out at a supplier meeting. He knocked on the open door even though it was already open. She looked up. He was not tall, but he was built with the kind of compactness that reads as density, and his face was closed in a way that was different from Min-jae's measured stillness. Min-jae's face was still because he was thinking. Yoon's face was still because he had chosen for it to be. He walked to the center of the room and stopped and looked at what she had done to the space. She had transformed the main living area substantially already. The generic art was down. The contractor had installed the first of the lighting changes. Warm-toned pendants in the kitchen and recessed ambient lighting in the main room that changed the entire temperature of the space. New rugs had arrived from a textile importer in Insadong, and were laid now across the concrete-look flooring. One wall had been painted a deep, muted terracotta that she had spent 3 days deciding on, and which was the single most significant decision she had made so far, because it changed everything about how the space felt. Yoon looked at the wall. "He approved that color?" he said. "He approved the whole plan," she said. "Yes." "He doesn't like warm colors." "He said he didn't have an opinion," she said, "which is different." Yoon looked at her. "You should know that I run security for this building and everything associated with it." "I gathered that." "Then you should also know that I've been watching you for 3 weeks." "I know," she said. She said it evenly because she had known. She had felt it, the particular awareness of someone keeping track. "Do you want to ask me whatever you came here to ask me, or is this more of an orientation visit?" His eyes were flat but not stupid. He was evaluating her, she realized, the way you evaluate something that has entered your operational environment. Not hostile yet, but not safe yet either. "You're not what he usually brings into the tower," Yoon said. "I'm his designer." "That's what this is filed as," he said. "That's not what it is." She put her pen down. She gave him her full attention, which was a choice because her full attention was something she usually had to be provoked into giving. "What do you think it is?" "A liability," Yoon said, "without necessarily being your fault." "Say it plainly." He looked at her for a moment, then, "There are people who pay close attention to what Min-jae values. Not the business. The personal. In 15 years, there has been almost nothing personal for them to pay attention to." He paused. "You've been in this tower 3 weeks. You've had dinner with him 6 times. Hyunji has noticed. The housekeeper has noticed. People outside this building are beginning to notice." Nia held very still. "What are you telling me?" "That being noticed is something Min-jae cares about," Yoon said. "Makes you a target." The word landed in the room without drama. He had said it like a fact, which was worse than if he had said it like a threat. She looked at him and thought about the building's lobby. The man at the door who was not a doorman. The elevator code. The secure floors that did not appear on any schematic. She said, "Does he know you're telling me this?" "No," Yoon said. "Why are you telling me?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I've been doing this long enough to know that the people who don't understand the situation are always more dangerous to him than the people who do." He picked up one of the tile samples from her work table and turned it over in his hands without really seeing it. "You have the option of being a person who understands the situation." She said, "And if I understand it, what am I supposed to do with that?" "Decide," he said, "whether the project is worth finishing." He put the tile sample down. He looked at the terracotta wall one more time. "Good color," he said, and walked out. Well, she did not tell Min-jae about the conversation. She told herself it was because there was nothing to tell. Yoon had stated facts, not made demands, and she was an adult who could assess her own situation. She told herself this and knew it was partially true, and also partially the fact that bringing the conversation to Min-jae would require her to acknowledge, out loud between the two of them, that there was a personal dimension to her presence here that warranted someone coming to warn her. And she was not ready to have that conversation. She worked instead. She worked the way she had always worked when things got complicated, with her whole body, moving through the space, making decisions, refining, pushing the contractors past their comfort zone because her standards were higher than theirs, and she was not going to produce something ordinary for this space. The penthouse was beginning to breathe. That was the only way she knew how to describe it. Like a building that had been holding its breath for 12 years and was slowly, room by room, beginning to release it. Min-jae noticed. He did not say so directly, but she could see it in the way he moved through the space when he came in from work. Slower, more deliberately, pausing at the kitchen counter where the limestone had been installed and running one hand along the surface. Standing in the doorway of the living room for an extra few seconds before entering. It was small, and it was not imagined. On a Wednesday evening in the 4th week, she was in the living room doing final positioning adjustments on a low credenza that had arrived from a craftsman in Gyeonggi province. She was on her hands and knees with a level because the floor had a slight grade, and she needed to compensate with a shim when she heard the elevator and Min-jae came into the apartment and stopped in the doorway. He had been in meetings since early morning. She knew this because Park Joon-ho's schedule updates, which she received for coordination purposes, had shown him booked solid. His jacket was off. He looked tired in the specific way of someone who had spent 12 hours being exactly what other people needed and had not had a moment to be anything else. He looked at her on the floor with the level. He looked at the credenza, which she had found in a warehouse in Mapogu and had refinished herself over 2 evenings with Hyunji's very skeptical assistance because the original finish was wrong and the craftsman was unavailable. He said, "You refinished that yourself." It had the wrong undertone. The original was too yellow. "You refinished antique furniture in my penthouse. With your materials," she said. "I used the wood stain from the sample kit the contractor left, which I asked your operations team about before doing." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and crouched beside her and looked at the level. "It's reading 0.2 degrees off," she said. "Is that enough to matter?" "It matters to me." He said nothing for a moment. He was very close and she could smell the day on him. Not unpleasant, just the particular smell of someone who had been in rooms and cars and other rooms for many hours. And it was more human than she had allowed herself to think about. And she did not let herself think about it now either. He said, "Yoon spoke to you." It was not a question. She looked up from the level. "Yes." "When?" 3 days ago." He was very still. She could not see his face from this angle. "He wasn't authorized to do that," Min-jae said. "He was doing his job," she said, "as he understands it. His job is building security, not operational guidance for my personal—" He stopped. She finished the sentence for him because she had learned in 3 weeks that he would choose silence over the wrong word, and she was not in the mood for silence right now. "Relationships," she said. "Is that the word?" He shifted. He was now looking at her directly, close enough that she could see the tiredness in his face more clearly than she had from the doorway, and something else behind it that was less easy to categorize. "What did he tell you?" Min-jae asked. "That being here makes me a target, that people watch what you value, that I should decide if the project is worth finishing." He breathed through his nose. And I'm still here," she said. "I have a credenza to level." He looked at her for a long moment, and whatever was in his expression in that moment was something she did not have practice reading because it was not an expression she had seen on many people's faces. It was something that looked like being seen and not knowing what to do about it. He stood up. He went to the kitchen and came back with a folded piece of cardboard. He knelt back down and fit the makeshift shim under the right front corner of the credenza. She checked the level, 0.0. She sat back on her heels. He was still kneeling next to her. "That was my job," she said. "I know," he said. They were close enough that speaking quietly was adequate, close enough that she was aware of his breathing and the fact that her own had changed rhythm slightly, which she noted and did not address. "Nia," he said. It was the first time he had used her name without anything attached to it. Not her last name as a form of address, not Miss Holloway the way Park Joon-ho used it. Just her name, and the way he said it told her something about how carefully he had been not saying it. "Don't," she said. He was quiet. "I know what you're going to say," she said, and she wasn't sure that was true, but she said it anyway, because there were things she needed to not hear yet. "And I need you to not say it right now." He held there for a moment longer. Then he stood up and went to the kitchen, and she heard him fill a glass with water and drink it. She stayed on the floor by the credenza. When he came back to the doorway, he said, "I have a call at 9. I'll be done by 10:30. "I'll be here," she said, because she was in the middle of a job, and that was the relevant fact. "I know," he said. The call that changed everything came on a Friday. Not from Min-jae, not from Park Joon-ho. From Priya at 7 in the morning Seoul time, which was 6 p.m. Chicago time, which meant Priya was calling from somewhere she had taken herself specifically to make this call and had not waited for morning. Nia was still in bed. She picked up on the second ring because Priya calling before 9 on a weekday was not normal. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong with me," Priya said, and her voice was the carefully level voice of someone who has decided not to deliver news badly. "Derek is—" "Nia, there's something you need to know." Nia sat up. "Tell me." "He's been talking. About you. About why you're in Seoul. He told people that the money situation was— He told a version where you needed to leave the country because your business was in financial trouble, and he reframed the account thing as something you both agreed to." The words came out tight and fast, which was what Priya did when she was furious and trying to report rather than react. It's going around in the design community here. 2 people asked me about it this week. One of them had heard you left because a client complaint made your license status complicated, which is, Nia, that's not a rumor. That's targeted. Upgate say Troy. Nia was sitting up in the bed in the tower in Seoul with the window showing her an early morning city, and her whole chest had gone cold. He's actively putting this out, she said. I think so. I can't prove it, but I think so. She breathed, in through the nose, out slowly. My license is clean. My business is solvent. The account recovery is ongoing and has nothing to do with the firm's standing. I know that, Priya said. Your actual clients know that, but the peripheral stuff, the people who might refer you, the people who know you casually. Nia, this kind of thing sticks if you're not here to counter it. She looked at the Seoul skyline through the floor-to-ceiling glass. She thought, 4 years. You gave him 4 years and your savings and your Portugal trip and your Dubai job, and he is standing in Chicago telling people a story that ends your career. Okay, she said. Okay. I heard you, she said, the same thing she had said at Rosalind's, the same 2 words, the same containment strategy. What are you going to do? Handle it, she said. Thank you for telling me. She hung up. She sat in the bed for 60 seconds. Then she got up and washed her face and went to her work table and opened her laptop and started drafting emails to her lawyer, to 3 clients she needed to get ahead of, to 2 industry contacts who had enough standing to push back against the version Derek was circulating if she gave them the accurate one quickly enough. She wrote with the fast, precise anger of someone who has converted their emotion entirely into productivity because the alternative is not useful. She did not hear Min-jae until he said her name from the hallway. She looked up. He was dressed and in the doorway of her work area, clearly on his way somewhere, and he had stopped because something in her face had told him to. What happened? He said. She told him. Not all of it. Not the emotional weight of it. Not the 3 a.m. bathroom floor version. Just the facts, in the order they occurred, because he was the kind of person who operated on facts. He listened without moving. When she finished, he said, His name. She looked up. What? Derek Vaughn, Min-jae said. His full name and his employer. Why? Because you need that to stop, he said. And because someone with the right conversation with the right people can make that happen much faster than a lawyer. The air in the room changed. She looked at him and understood clearly for the first time, not theoretically but actually, in her chest and in the quality of the silence between them, what kind of man she was sitting across from. Not the hotel lobby version, not the gala version, the real one. I don't want you to do anything to him, she said. I know. I mean it. I know you mean it, he said. I'm not going to touch him. I'm going to have a conversation that results in the source of the rumor losing interest in continuing to circulate it. She was quiet. Nia, he said, and there was her name again, careful and complete. Let me help you. She thought, this is the point of no return. She knew it the way you know certain structural things about a space. Not because someone tells you, but because you have trained your eye to recognize load-bearing walls. She could say no. She could handle it the way she handled everything, alone, methodically, at the cost of time she didn't entirely have. Or she could say yes, and saying yes would mean something. Not about Derek, about this, about whatever was building in the air of this apartment and between the 2 of them, and she knew it and he knew it, and they had been circling it for a month. She said, yes. The word came out steady. Min-jae nodded once. He took out his phone and stepped back into the hallway, and she heard him speaking quietly in Korean, and the tone was the tone of someone issuing a very specific instruction with complete expectation that it would be followed. She turned back to her laptop. Her hands were not quite steady. And downstairs, in the room with no windows, Yoon Dae-sung was looking at his own phone at a message that had come in from the same tower in Osaka that they had been watching for 6 weeks. And the message was short and in code, and what it said, when decoded, was that the Chongliu organization had identified the woman in the tower. They had a name. They had an address in Chicago, and they were no longer simply watching. The message from Osaka came in at 11:47 p.m. Yoon Dae-sung read it twice, put his phone face down on the desk in the windowless room, and sat very still for approximately 4 seconds. Then he picked the phone back up and read it a third time, because the first 2 readings had produced a result he needed to verify before acting on. The Changlu organization had a name, they had an address, they were no longer watching. He stood up and went to the door and stopped with his hand on the frame and thought about the 41 floors above him and the woman who was up there working on her laptop with her hands slightly unsteady and the man who was in the hallway speaking quietly into a phone, making a call about a man in Chicago named Derek Vaughn. He thought about the sequence of decisions that had produced this situation, starting with the gala in Chicago and the champagne on the sleeve, and Min Jae choosing, for the first time in 11 years, to bring someone into the tower who was not operational. He had told Park Joon-ho 2 weeks ago, someone without security, without history, without any reason to be untouchable. He had been right about that. He went back to his desk and picked up a different phone, the one with the encrypted line, and made 3 calls in 12 minutes. The first to the team lead on overnight tower security. The second to their contact at the Incheon Port Authority, who monitored Changlu movement through customs channels. The third to a man in Osaka whose job it was to know things before they became problems, and who had, in this instance, been approximately 36 hours behind. Then he went upstairs. Min Jae was still in the hallway when the elevator opened. He had finished the call about Derek and was standing with his phone at his side, looking at nothing in particular, and he turned when Yoon came off the elevator and read Yoon's face the way he had been reading Yoon's face for 15 years, which meant he understood within 3 seconds that this was not an update visit. Inside, Min Jae said. They went into the study, the one room in the penthouse that Nia had not yet touched because it was not in her scope, which meant it still looked the way the apartment had looked before her, functional and cold and full of things that had function but no warmth. Min Jae closed the door. Yoon told him. He watched Min Jae's face as he said it. In 15 years, he had watched Min Jae receive bad news of many varieties, and he had developed a taxonomy of Min Jae's responses, the particular tightening around his jaw that meant he was recalculating rather than reacting, the way his hands went still when something had moved from manageable to serious. He watched all of those things happen now in the space of about 8 seconds. How reliable is the Osaka source? Min Jae said. 90%. What's the 10%? Timeline. We know they have the information. We don't know how quickly they move on it. Min Jae sat down. He did this rarely, sat down in the middle of a conversation rather than standing, and it told Yoon more than the sitting down itself would normally tell. He sat and put his elbows on the desk and his hands flat on the surface in front of him and looked at them. Her Chicago address, Min Jae said. Yes. Not this building. Not yet, Yoon said. Changlu doesn't have the tower location formally connected to her yet. What they have is the design firm, the Gala connection, and the Chicago apartment. Our read is they're building leverage before approach. They want something to threaten. They're not moving to actually harm her yet. Yet, Min Jae said. Yet. Min Jae was quiet for a moment. Outside the study's single small window, the only window in the penthouse that faced north rather than the skyline, the Seoul night was doing what it always did, which was proceed without concern for what was happening in the rooms beneath it. I need to tell her, Min Jae said. Yoon said nothing. She needs to know what she's in. Yes, Yoon said. She does. He paused. I tried to give her the outline 3 days ago. Min Jae looked at him. Without authorization, Yoon said. I know. I made a judgment call. What did she do with it? She stayed, Yoon said. She said she had a credenza to level. Something moved through Min Jae's expression. Not humor, not quite, but the proximity to it. Gone in a second. She shouldn't have stayed, he said, and the way he said it was not about her judgment. It was about his. It was about the fact that he had let this happen, had let the 14 minutes at the gala become a phone call, become a flight, become a month of dinners and evenings in a space that was slowly becoming something other than a fortress. And in doing so, had handed the people who watched him the most useful weapon they had found in years. No, Yoon agreed. She shouldn't have, but she did. So now we manage what's real. Not what should have happened. Min-jae stood up. He went to the door of the study and opened it. Nia was visible through the open door of her work area, still at her laptop, still composing the emails she had been composing when he had left the hallway. The lamp at her work table was the only light still on in the main penthouse space, and it lit her in the particular way of a lamp doing focused work. And from this angle, she looked like something a person with a different life might come home to. He thought, I did this. Whatever happens next, I did this. He went and knocked on the open door. She looked up from the laptop and knew immediately from his face that this was not about Derek. Derek had been erased as a conversation topic in approximately the 12 minutes of the phone call in the hallway. Whatever Min-jae had arranged would take effect quietly and in its own time, and Derek Vaughn would find that the version of events he had been circulating lost all traction without him ever knowing why. That part was handled. This was something else. Close the laptop, he said. She closed it. He sat down across from her at the work table. Not in the chair she used for clients, the wider one she'd brought in herself, but in the straight-back chair that was technically for storage purposes and was now functioning as a seat because he needed to be at eye level with her for this. He told her. He did not soften it. He told her about the Changlu organization, who they were, what their operational history looked like, why they paid attention to him and had been paying attention to him for 3 years. He told her about the message from Osaka. He told her they had her name and her Chicago address and had connected her to his building through the gala and through his known movements. He told her she was not safe. She sat across from him and listened without interrupting, which was what she always did when information was being delivered, because she had learned that interrupting the delivery of information before it was complete resulted in incomplete information. She kept her hands flat on the table. She kept her breathing even. She listened to every word he said, and she felt, behind her ribs, a very slow and spreading cold that was not fear exactly, but was the feeling that preceded fear, the feeling of a situation resolving into its actual shape from a shape you had thought it was. When he finished, she said, "How long have you known this was possible?" He did not look away. "From the gala." "You knew from the gala that bringing me here could do this." "I knew it was a risk," he said. "I assessed the risk as manageable. And now?" "And now," he said, "I was wrong." She breathed. "You should have told me," she said, and her voice was very quiet and very flat. "You hired me for a project. You flew me to another country. You let me—" She stopped. She restarted. "You let me settle in. You let me make decisions about this space like I was going to be here and like it was safe to be here, and you knew the whole time that your enemies were capable of—" "I made a calculation," he said. "Don't," she said. The word came out sharp. "Do not give me the operational version of this. I am a person who is sitting in your building in a foreign country, and someone on the other side of an ocean has my home address. Don't tell me you made a calculation." He held her gaze. "You're right," he said. "I should have told you earlier." She stood up. She needed to be standing. She went to the window and stood with her back to him and looked at the Seoul skyline that she had been looking at for a month, and that had started to feel in the stupid, naive way that things feel before they don't anymore, like something that belonged partially to her. "What happens now?" she said. "Now," he said, "I move you to a secure location, not the tower, somewhere off the grid. A team goes to your Chicago apartment and removes anything that can be used as leverage. You don't go back there until this is handled." She turned around. "How long does that take?" He was quiet for exactly 1 second, which was enough. "Min-jae," she said. "How long?" "Weeks," he said. "Possibly longer. Changlu is not a small operation. Dismantling the threat structurally takes time." She laughed. Not the warm kind, the hollow kind, the kind that comes out when something is so far from what you planned that laughing is the only physiological response that makes sense. "I have a business," she said. "I have clients. I have a lease on an apartment in Chicago that I am apparently not allowed to go back to." "I know." "You know," she said, "and that's what you've got." "No," he said. "I also have resources, and I have the ability to fix this, and I'm telling you I will fix this, but I need you to trust me enough to let me do it the right way." The word trust landed in the room between them, and they both heard it land. She looked at him across the work table with the lamp between them and the Seoul skyline behind her, and she thought about 4 years with Derek and the burgundy dress and the bathroom floor and the Portugal bookmarks she had deleted one by one. And she thought, "You have not made great decisions about who to trust, Nia Holloway. Your track record is not strong." "I need a minute," she said. "Take it," he said. She went to her room and closed the door. She sat on the edge of the bed and did not cry and did not have a breakdown and did not call Priya because it was the middle of the night in Chicago, and also because there was nothing Priya could do, and also because saying this out loud to someone outside, it would make it real in a way she was still managing the edges of. She sat on the bed and thought. She thought about Yoon Dae-sung 3 days ago saying, "Decide if the project is worth finishing," and herself saying she had a credenza to level. She thought about Min Jae's hands flat on his desk, and the 12-minute phone call in the hallway, and the limestone countertop and the terracotta wall, and the way he had said her name the first time without anything attached to it. She thought about the fact that her chest was doing something she did not have permission to let her chest do, and that this was possibly the worst timing in the history of human feelings. She sat there for 7 minutes. Then she got up, washed her face for the second time that day, and went back to the work table. Min Jae was still in the straight-back chair. He had not moved. He had the quality of someone capable of waiting without it costing him, which was either a gift or the result of a very long education. She sat back down across from him. "Tell me what the secure location is," she said. Something moved in his face. Not relief. He was too controlled for relief to show clean, but the reduction of something that had been present before she came back into the room. "A property in Yongin," he said. 40 minutes from the city. Residential neighborhood, nothing flagged to my name directly. Full security team, unmarked. You'd continue the project remotely for the time being. Hyunji can manage on site." She thought about the penthouse half-finished behind her, the primary suite that was not yet done. The second bathroom she had been excited about because the light in there was extraordinary at noon, and she had a tile in mind that would make it sing. "I'm not stopping the project," she said. "I know. I'll go to Yongin. I'll work from there. But I'm finishing what I started." He nodded once. "And Min Jae." She looked at him steadily. "If anything else is happening that affects my safety, and you know about it, and you choose not to tell me because you've run a calculation, I will leave. Not because I'm afraid, because I won't be managed like a situation." He held her eyes. "Understood," he said, and he said it with the full weight of someone who does not use that word without meaning it. She said, "Okay." They sat for a moment in the lamplight with the city behind them. Then he said, "Pack for a week. We move at 5 a.m. She stood up. She went to the closet and started pulling clothes from hangers with the systematic efficiency of someone who had packed and unpacked herself many times and knew how to do it without feeling it. She did not let herself feel it. Not yet. At 4:40 a.m., while Nia was checking the zipper on her bag and Min Jae was in the hallway with Yoon going over the departure route, Park Joon-ho's phone received an alert from the monitoring system on the tower's external camera network. He was already awake. He had been awake since Yoon's call. He looked at the alert. He looked at the camera timestamp. He looked at the vehicle make and the partial plate that the system had flagged and cross-referenced with the Changliu surveillance file they had been building for 3 years. He went to the hallway. Yoon saw his face and stopped speaking. "They're already here," Park Joon-ho said. "Not in Osaka, not monitoring from a distance. Here, street level. 2 vehicles, 40 meters from the tower entrance, engine off, arrived 17 minutes ago." Yoon looked at Min Jae. Min Jae looked at the elevator. At the floor indicator above it, currently showing 38, showing Nia's floor, showing the floor she was standing on right now, checking the zipper on a bag she had packed to leave at 5 a.m., which was now 20 minutes away and no longer the plan. "Change of route," Min Jae said, and his voice had shifted into something Nia had not heard from him yet. Not louder, not harder, but stripped of every layer that wasn't operational. The voice of a man who had built his empire on moving faster than the people who came after him. "Parking level, service exit, now." Yoon was already on his radio. Min Jae went to Nia's door and knocked twice, and opened it before she could answer because there was no longer time for the sequence of knocking and waiting. She was standing with her bag on her shoulder, coat on, ready, and the look on his face stopped her mid-breath. "We're going now," he said. "Not 5 a.m. Now, don't ask me why until we're in the car." She looked at him for 1 second, just one. "Okay," she said. They moved. Kot. The service elevator was in the back of the tower, accessed through a door in the utility corridor that did not appear on the building directory. Yoon went first, then Naya, then Min Jae. And the elevator was slower than the main ones, and the fluorescent light inside it hummed at a frequency that set Nia's teeth slightly on edge, and the ride down to the parking level took 90 seconds that felt like considerably longer. The parking level smelled like concrete and engine coolant. It was mostly dark. 2 of Yoon's team were already there, positioned near an SUV with no identifying plates, and they moved without speaking, which told her they had done this before, and the absence of speech was not anxiety, but efficiency. Yoon opened the rear door and she got in. Min Jae got in on the other side. Yoon took the front passenger seat and the driver, she didn't know his name, was already running. The vehicle moved. Nia sat in the back seat in the dark of the parking level, and then in the briefly lit tunnel of the exit ramp, and then in the Seoul streets at 4:43 in the morning, which were not empty, but were close enough to it that everything felt exposed. And she held her bag in her lap and kept her breathing even, and did not ask what was happening because he had told her not to ask until they were in the car. And they were in the car, but she could see from the set of Yoon's shoulders in the front seat that this was not the time for the explanation. She looked at Min Jae. He was looking at his phone, then out the window, then at Yoon. She said quietly, "We were already being watched, before tonight." It was not a question. He looked at her. "They didn't move because of Osaka," she said. "Osaka was the message telling you they were going to move. They had already moved." He held her eyes and said nothing, which confirmed it. She looked out the window at a Seoul that was doing nothing wrong, that was just a city at 4:43 a.m. with its streetlights and its convenience stores and its people who were somewhere sleeping and not in a car with blacked-out windows, moving through back streets toward a property in Yongin whose address she did not know. She thought about the Chicago apartment, her drafting table, the mood boards pinned to the wall, the coffee maker that took exactly 4 minutes and produced the only decent cup she'd found after 3 weeks of trying different settings, the neighbor's cat that sometimes sat on the shared landing and let her scratch its ears on the way to the elevator. She thought, all of that is gone for now, maybe longer. You don't know how much longer. She thought, and you said yes. You sat at that work table and he asked you to trust him, and you said yes, and you meant it. And that is still true right now, at 4:43 in the morning, in a car that is moving too fast through streets. You don't know. She breathed. The car hit the expressway and the city fell away behind them, and Min Jae's hand, in the dark of the back seat, moved toward hers on the center console. Not grabbing, not reaching, just moving until the edge of his hand was against the edge of hers. A contact so slight it could be the movement of the car. She did not move her hand away. They drove. And in the tower 40 minutes behind them, in the utility corridor outside the service elevator, 2 men who were not building staff and did not appear on any visitor log moved through the space with flashlights and the specific certainty of people who had been given a floor number and a room number and a face. They found the guest suite. They found the lamp at the work table. They found the mood boards pinned to the walls and the material samples spread across the surface and the measuring tape left on the floor by the credenza and the notebook open to the last page she had written in, which was a page of dimensions and material notes, and in the margin, in the small, tight handwriting she used when she was thinking fast, a single line that was not a design note. He said I wasn't going to break, even though I wanted to, and that deserved acknowledgement. One of the men photographed the room, the other photographed the notebook, then they photographed the line in the margin, and sent it, along with the room number and the confirmation that she was no longer there, to a man in a city 600 kilometers away who had been waiting for exactly this. Not the room number, not the confirmation of the departure, the photograph of the line in the margin, because that was not a designer's note. That was the proof of what she was too. The property in Yongin was a house that did not look like a safe house. That was the point of it. It sat on a residential street between a retired couple's garden and a family whose children left shoes on the front step. And from the outside, it was a 2-story house with a gray tile roof and a persimmon tree in the front yard that had dropped most of its leaves and looked cold and ordinary in the pre-dawn dark. The security was embedded rather than visible. Cameras in the eaves that read as weatherproofing, reinforced door frames that looked like renovation. Two men in a vehicle parked 50 meters down the street who looked like nothing at all. They arrived at 5:31 a.m. Nia got out of the car and stood on the frost-stiffened grass and looked at the house and breathed the cold air, and her legs were slightly unsteady from 90 minutes of sitting rigid in the back seat with her hand against Min-jae's and her brain running through the same loop it had been running since the parking level. You left the tower, you are in Yongin, someone had your floor number and your room number. The project is half finished, your apartment in Chicago has been compromised, and the only person in this country who knows your full name and what you look like when you're thinking is standing 4 feet to your left. She steadied her legs through will alone. Min-jae came around the car. He stopped beside her and looked at the house with the same assessment he gave everything. "It's not the penthouse," he said. "I don't need the penthouse," she said. "I need a desk and Wi-Fi and 12 hours of sleep." "You can have all three." "I know," she said, and went inside. She slept until noon. She did not expect to sleep at all. She lay down on a bed in a room on the second floor that was plain and clean and had a window that showed the persimmon tree and the gray morning sky, and she thought, "I will lie here and think through the situation and make a list, and then I will get up and start handling it." That was the plan. She was asleep in 6 minutes. When she woke up, it was noon, and the light through the window had shifted, and there was the distant sound of someone moving in the kitchen below, and the smell of something being cooked, and for approximately 4 seconds she did not remember where she was, and those 4 seconds were the best 4 seconds she had experienced in recent memory. Then she remembered. She got up. She washed her face in the small bathroom. She looked at herself in the mirror for a moment. The dark circles, the set of her jaw, the fact that she had slept in her clothes, and she said to her own reflection quietly, "You're still here. Handle it." She went downstairs. Min-jae was in the kitchen. He was standing at the stove with his back to her, and he was, against all available evidence of competence, attempting to make eggs. This was apparent from the sound, and from the way he was holding the pan slightly too far from the burner, and from the fact that one of Yoon's security team was sitting at the kitchen table with his arms crossed and an expression of profound professional neutrality that suggested he had been watching this unfold for some time and had made the decision that this was not his area of intervention. Min-jae heard her come in and did not turn around. "They told me there was food in the refrigerator. I looked at the food. I decided eggs were the safest choice." She looked at the pan. "You've got the heat too high." "I know that now." "Turn it down." He turned it down. She got a glass of water and leaned against the counter and watched him fight the eggs into something edible. His sleeves were rolled up and he had the look of a man who had not slept, which she suspected was accurate. "Did you sleep?" she asked. "No." "Why not?" He slid the eggs onto a plate and turned to face her. "Because you were asleep and someone needed to not be." She looked at him, at the rolled sleeves and the tiredness he was carrying with the same composure he carried everything and the plate of eggs he was holding out to her, because the alternative had been waiting for her to wake up with nothing ready. She took the plate. She sat at the table and ate the eggs, which were slightly overcooked, but not wrong, and he poured 2 cups of coffee from a machine that someone had set up and stocked, and he sat across from her and drank his coffee, and the security team member at the end of the table looked at his phone with tremendous focus. She said, "Tell me what's happening." He put his cup down. He told her. Yoon had run a full trace on the 2 vehicles from the tower. Both were connected to a logistics company that was 3 shell entities removed from Changlu's known financial structure. Close enough to confirm, not close enough for anything legally actionable. The men who had entered the tower were gone. They had been in the building for 11 minutes and had not accessed any floor above 30, which meant they had used a service entry that had not been on the official building schematic, which meant someone had provided them a schematic that was more complete than the public one. That last part was the problem within the problem. Someone inside the tower's operational circle had given Changlu information about the building's actual layout. Not a contractor, not a service vendor. The level of detail required meant someone with genuine access. "You have a leak," she said. "Yes," he said. "Do you know who?" Yoon has 3 candidates, he said. He'll know within 48 hours. She thought about Yoon Dae-sung, the flat eyes, the density of him, the way he had said good color about her terracotta wall before walking out. She thought, 48 hours probably means 12. And Chang Liu, she said, what do they want? Not tactically. What is this actually about? Min Jae was quiet for a moment. Territory, he said. There's a logistics corridor through the Yellow Sea that both organizations have claims on. 6 months ago, I finalized an agreement with the Korean Maritime Authority that effectively locked Chang Liu out of that corridor legally. They've been looking for leverage to reopen the negotiation on their terms. And I'm the leverage. You were supposed to be, he said. The photograph of your room was a message. They know you're not there anymore. They know I moved you. So what's next? He met her eyes. They take the next step. Something that tells me the leverage is still viable. She held very still. What does that mean? She said. He looked at her with the full weight of his face. No reduction, no softening. The way he looked at things when he had decided she could handle what she was seeing. It means they move from information gathering to action, he said. Something I can't ignore. Something that requires me to respond, which puts me in a reactive position, which is the position they want me in. And if you don't respond? Then I'm someone who can be acted on without consequence, he said, which means everyone in my organization is exposed, which means Chang Liu has won without a fight. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, a car passed on the residential street. Ordinary, distant. She said, so you're going to respond? Yes. Proactively. Yes. She breathed. Tell me what that means. He told her. She sat with it for 30 seconds. Then she said, I want to know when it happens. Nia, I'm not asking to be involved, she said. I'm asking not to be managed. Tell me when it happens. That's the only thing I'm asking for. He looked at her across the table in the kitchen of the safe house in Yonggin with the persimmon tree outside the window and the sound of the city beyond it, and he said, yes. The 48 hours Yoon had estimated became 19. He walked into the Yonggin house at 11 p.m. on the second night, with his jacket damp from the cold, and went directly to the room where Min Jae was working and closed the door. Nia was at the desk in the adjacent room with her laptop, doing project work. She had established a remote workflow with Hyun-ji that was less efficient than being on site but was functional, and working kept her from the alternative, which was sitting with the specific texture of waiting for something bad to happen. She heard Yoon's voice through the wall. Not the words, the register. She put down her pen. 8 minutes later, the door between the rooms opened, and Min Jae stood in the doorway. His expression was the controlled one, the one that had zero information on the surface and a great deal beneath it. It was Song Tae-won, he said. She didn't know the name, but from the way he said it, the particular flatness of it, the absence of anything that could be read as surprise, she understood that this was someone he had not expected, and the not expecting was the wound. Who is he? She said. Head of building operations, Min Jae said. 11 years. She thought about 11 years. She thought about how long 11 years was, what it meant to trust someone for 11 years in the kind of world Min Jae operated in, what had to be in place for that level of access to be granted and maintained. Why? She said. Chang Liu got to his family, Min Jae said. His son has debts, the kind you don't accumulate by accident. He paused. He wasn't a willing asset, he was a cornered one. She stood up from the desk. Does that change what happens to him? He looked at her. No, he said. It changes how I feel about it. It doesn't change what has to happen. She thought about that, about the distinction between those two things, what you felt and what had to happen, and about how much of Min Jae's life existed in that gap. Okay, she said. What's next? Yoon is moving on Song tonight, containing the leak. He paused. And Chang Liu knows we're at 48 hours from their move at the tower. Our read is they push next within the next 12 hours, before we can fully regroup. What does the push look like? He hesitated, which he did not do often. What? She said. They have someone in Chicago, he said. They have since before the tower move. We believe their next action is there rather than here. The cold came back. the spreading kind from behind the ribs. My apartment, she said. Your apartment has been cleared, he said. No one is in it. Your lawyer has been contacted through a cover channel and is staying at an alternate address. Priya, he stopped. He had not been supposed to know Priya's name. She saw him register that he had said it. Your friend in Chicago has been moved to a hotel by someone she thinks is a firm client. She's safe. Nia looked at him. You've been running ops on my life for 2 days. Yes. Without telling me. I'm telling you now. She turned away from him. She went to the window and put her hand on the glass, which was cold from the November night outside. She was furious, and she was also, underneath the fury, something she couldn't name easily, something that felt like being held, and hating that she needed it, and being unable to pretend she didn't. You should have told me when you started, she said. Yes, he said. I should have. She kept her hand on the glass. Are they going to do something to her? To Priya? Not if we move first, he said. That's what tonight is. She turned around. He was standing in the doorway with his jacket still on, and the tiredness of 2 days without sleep accumulated in the lines of his face, and he was looking at her with the eyes of someone who had made 100 decisions in the past 48 hours and was about to make one more and needed her to know that the weight of that was not lost on him. Go do what you have to do, she said. He held her eyes for a moment. Then he said, Stay inside. Don't open the door for anyone who isn't Yoon's team. There's a phone on the kitchen counter. That's the only number you call if anything feels wrong. I know how to stay inside a house, she said. Almost. The edge of it. I know you do, he said. And then, Nia. The name again, bare and unattached. When this is over, go, she said. When it's over, we'll talk. Go. He went. She did not sleep. She sat at the desk with the lamp on and worked on the primary suite plans for the penthouse because it was something to do with her hands, and because the penthouse was still hers to finish, and she was going to finish it regardless of what the next 12 hours produced. She worked with a precision that was slightly too controlled to be comfortable, the handwriting a little too neat, the measurements checked twice when once would do, and she did not think about Priya in a hotel she had been moved to by a stranger, and she did not think about her apartment in Chicago with its drafting table and its mood boards. And she did not think about Min Jae moving through the Seoul night in a car she couldn't track doing things she was not going to know the specifics of. She worked. At 2:17 a.m., the phone on the kitchen counter rang. She was across the room in 4 steps. It was one of Yoon's team, a man named Han, who had been stationed in the house since arrival and spoke limited English with extreme precision. He said, Miss Holloway, there is a development. Mr. Kang asks that you stay in the house. All is under control. He will call in 1 hour. Is he safe? She said. A pause. He is currently managing a situation. That's not what I asked. Another pause. He is safe, Miss Holloway. She put the phone down. She went back to the desk and sat and did not pick up the pencil. 1 hour. She looked at the primary suite plan spread in front of her. At the window placement she had been wrestling with for 3 days. The question of whether to frame the view or let it breathe. Whether the person sleeping in that room wanted to wake up to the city or wanted to turn away from it and find something quieter. She had been designing for a man she had met 14 minutes ago at a gala. She had come here for the money and for the fresh start, and because she had nothing left to lose, and somewhere in the previous 5 weeks, those reasons had shifted into something she couldn't fully name yet, but could feel in the way she kept choosing to stay when the door was open. She looked at the window placement. She picked up the pencil. She drew the frame wider. She let the view breathe. Min Jae's call came at 3:44 a.m., 53 minutes after Han's. She picked up before the first ring finished. I'm fine, he said before she could ask. She exhaled through her nose, long and slow. Chung Liu's Chicago asset has been neutralized, he said. Non-lethally. He's in custody. The useful kind. He'll give us the rest of the network access points before morning. Priya? Safe. She doesn't know anything happened. Your team? A pause. 2 injuries, not serious. She closed her eyes for a second. Min Jae. I'm not hurt, he said. I'm telling you that clearly because I know that's what you're asking. She breathed. When are you coming back? 2 hours? Maybe 3. She looked at the window. The persimmon tree was a dark shape against the slightly lighter dark of the pre-dawn sky. I'll be here, she said. Silence for a moment. Not the heavy kind. The kind where 2 people have stopped needing to fill the space. Then his voice, quieter. The primary suite window. Frame it or let it breathe. She held the phone and looked at the plans and felt something move in her chest that she had been holding at a careful distance for 5 weeks. Let it breathe, she said. The view is the point. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. It is. She heard him breathe. She heard in the background the sound of a soul street at nearly 4 in the morning. Wind, distant traffic, the particular quality of a city in the hours when most of it is finally quiet. 3 hours, she said. 3 hours, he said, and ended the call. She put the phone down. She sat at the desk in Yongin with the plans in front of her, and the persimmon tree outside, and the lamp throwing its circle of light across the dimensions and notes, and the single revised window frame she had drawn wider, and she thought, this is what it costs. All of it. The tower, the terracotta wall, the limestone countertop, the 14 minutes at the Blackstone Gala, the flight to Seoul, the service elevator at 4:43 a.m., the safe house, the 2 injuries she did not have names for, the man who had not slept in 2 days and was somewhere in the Seoul night managing consequences she would never fully know. This is what it costs to be chosen by someone whose world is built on danger. And the question, the real one, the one underneath every other question she had been asking for 5 weeks, was not whether she could handle the cost. It was whether she was willing to. She sat with that. The sky outside the window was beginning to shift from black toward the very earliest edge of gray, the kind of gray that doesn't promise anything yet but means the night is losing its grip. The persimmon tree became slightly more distinct against it. The street below stayed quiet. She was still sitting at the desk when headlights swept across the ceiling from a vehicle turning onto the residential street below, and she heard the engine cut, and she heard a car door, and she heard footsteps on the path outside that she recognized by their pace and their weight before they reached the door. And she did not get up yet because she needed one more. She heard the footsteps reach the door. She heard the key. Not a knock. Yoon's team had given him a key to the house, and the fact that he used it rather than knocked told her something about what kind of exhausted he was, the kind where the small formalities fall away because there is nothing left to spend on them. She heard the door open. She heard it close. She heard him stop in the entryway. She got up from the desk then. Not fast. The way you move when you have been sitting very still for a long time, and your body needs a moment to remember how. She walked to the doorway between the workroom and the main room of the house, and she stood there and looked at him. He was still in his jacket. It was darker at the left shoulder than the right. Not blood, she assessed in the first second. Rain and something else. Oil, maybe? The residue of a night spent in places that were not clean. His hands were at his sides. He had the look of someone who had crossed a significant distance and arrived and was now standing very still because moving again required a decision about where to go next, and he had not made it yet. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then she crossed the room, and she put her arms around him, and she held on, and she felt him exhale. A long, controlled release of breath. That was the first uncontrolled thing she had seen from him. The first thing that was not managed or measured or deliberate. Just a man breathing out the weight of a night she had not been part of, and his arms came around her and he held her back. They stood like that in the main room of the safe house in Yongin with the gray pre-dawn coming through the windows and the persimmon tree outside and the distant sound of a city that had kept moving through the night without caring about any of it. She did not ask what had happened. Not yet. She held on and he held on, and that was sufficient for right now. After a while he said into her hair, "The window." She pulled back enough to look at him. "You drew it wider," he said, "in the plans. I could see it from here." She looked over her shoulder at the desk. The plans were visible from the doorway, the revised window frame clear in the lamplight. "I told you," she said, "let it breathe." He looked at her face, at the dark circles in the lamplight, and the set of her jaw that she had been holding since 4:43 a.m. the previous morning. He looked at her the way he looked at the limestone sample and the terracotta wall and every other thing she had brought into a space that had not known how to be lived in. "Sit down," she said. "I'll make coffee." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," she said. "Sit down." He sat. The coffee was better than his eggs. She made it at the machine in the kitchen and brought 2 cups to the table and sat across from him, the way she had sat across from him on the first night in the penthouse. Except that they were in Yongin, and it was almost 5 in the morning, and he had not slept in 2.5 days, and there was nothing between them now that needed to be kept at a careful distance. She said, "Tell me what happened, the version you can tell." He drank half the coffee first. Then he told her. Chung-Liu's Chicago asset had been a man named Rourke, mid-level, sent 6 days before the tower incident to establish a physical presence near her apartment and develop options. He had not been authorized to act. He had been there to be available if Chung-Liu decided to escalate. The order had come through at 11 p.m. Seoul time. Establish contact, make the leverage visible, meaning appear near someone Nia knew, make himself known, put the pressure on in a way that Min Jae would hear about within hours. Yoon's Chicago contact had intercepted the order transmission. Min Jae's people had reached Rourke 40 minutes before Rourke reached anyone connected to Nia. Rourke was now in a location she did not need to know about, talking to people she did not need to know about, providing information that would take approximately 72 more hours to fully extract and act on. Chung-Liu's leader, Min Jae said, a man named Wei Guo-chen. He's based in Busan, not Seoul. He's been running this operation from there, which is why we lost time on the initial Osaka raid. We were looking at the wrong city. Is he going to keep coming? She said. Min Jae held his cup. No, he said. Rourke gave us the corridor agreement documentation that Chung-Liu was using as the underlying motive. There's a countermove available through the Maritime Authority that removes the legal ambiguity they were exploiting. Once that's filed, which happens this morning, it was drafted last week. There's no strategic value in continuing to pressure me. That's why you're not going after Wei directly, she said. Going after Wei directly is a war, he said. Wars cost more than the corridor is worth to either side. He looked at her steadily. This ends at the document level. His leverage disappears. He loses interest. She nodded. She understood the logic. She also understood what the logic meant. That this had never been about her, not really, not as a person. She had been a variable, a pressure point, the human version of a document held over someone's head. She thought about that. You're thinking about the fact that this was never personal, he said. She looked up. For them, he said. It was never personal for them. You were useful to them the same way a contract clause is useful. A mechanism. He put his cup down. That's what I allowed to happen. I let you become a mechanism by not protecting you the way I should have from the beginning. You couldn't have predicted... I could have predicted something, he said. I have been in this world long enough to know that the people who come after me look for what I value. I have spent 15 years not valuing anything they could use. And then I brought you here and I valued you, and I told myself I had managed the risk and I was wrong. The kitchen was quiet. She said, Are you apologizing? Yes, he said. That's what I'm doing. She looked at him, at the exhaustion and the rain-dark shoulder of his jacket and the hands around the coffee cup and the particular quality of his face when he was not managing anything. Not the operational version, not the controlled version, just Min Jae at almost 5 in the morning having said the thing he meant without construction around it. She said, I'm not going to tell you it was fine, because it wasn't. I know. I'm going to tell you that I made choices too, she said. I got on the plane. I said yes to the call. I said yes in the workroom when you asked me to trust you. Those were my choices. I don't want you to carry them like they were things that happened to me. He was looking at her carefully. I'm a grown woman, Min Jae. I walked into this with my eyes open enough. She paused. Not fully open, but enough. He breathed. It should have been fully. Yes, she said. It should have. And next time it will be. She let that land. The next time, the assumption embedded in it, the thing it meant about what she thought the future looked like. But I'm not leaving because of what happened. I want to be clear about that. He was very still. I'm not running, she said. I thought about it. I sat at that desk for 3 hours and I thought about it seriously. whether the cost is too high, whether I'm the kind of person who can live adjacent to your world and not lose myself in it. She turned her cup in her hands, and the answer I kept coming back to is that I've already been living adjacent to your world for 5 weeks, and I haven't lost anything. I've actually... She stopped. She started again. I built something in that penthouse, not just the design, something else, and I'm not walking away from it. Min-jae sat across from her and said nothing for a long moment. Then, "What are you afraid of?" She looked at him. The question was direct and quiet, and it deserved the same. "That eventually this ends," she said. "That eventually the empire pulls you back and the danger recalibrates, and I'm a variable again. Not for your enemies this time, for you. That I become the thing you set down when the world gets heavy enough." He held her eyes. "Derek set me down," she said, "after 4 years. I gave him everything, and he set me down for something that was easier." Her voice did not waver, but it was close. "I cannot survive that again. Specifically, I cannot survive that from you. So before anything else gets said or decided, I need you to know that's what I'm carrying." The kitchen was entirely silent. Min-jae stood up. He came around the table and he crouched in front of her chair, not standing over her, not across from her, but at her level, eye to eye, the way you position yourself when you need someone to know you mean exactly what you're about to say. "I have not made many personal decisions in my life," he said. "Almost none. The things I have chosen have been strategic, calculated, managed." He held her eyes and did not look away. "I did not choose to bring you here because of the penthouse. I chose to bring you here because of 14 minutes in a ballroom when you were bleeding internally and you stood there and you did not let it break you. And I thought, that is a person. Not a situation, not a variable. A person who knows how to carry weight without dropping it." He paused. "I chose you. That is not a calculation. That is not going to recalibrate." She breathed. "I have crossed uncomfortable territory to say that," he said, and the slight formality of it, the particular construction of the sentence that was Min-jae's English at its most precise, because he was most precise when things mattered most to him, it was the most human she had ever heard him sound. She said, "Okay." He waited. "I said okay," she said, and the thing behind her eyes was warm and complicated, and she did not try to stop it. "That means I believe you. Don't make me say it a third time." Something moved across his face. The thing she had been seeing the edges of for 5 weeks. The thing adjacent to a smile. The involuntary shift that happened when he was too tired and too honest to contain it. It was not a large expression. It didn't need to be. He stood up and put his hand out, and she took it and stood up, and they stood in the kitchen of the safe house in Yongin at 5 in the morning, with the persimmon tree going slowly gold in the first actual light of the day, coming through the window. And she thought, this is a beginning. Not the beginning, they had had that 14 minutes in a ballroom, but a beginning of the thing that came after the cost had been paid. She said, "Go sleep." "I'm fine. You have not slept in 3 days and you're holding a coffee cup like it's the only thing keeping you upright," she said. "Go sleep. I'll finish the primary suite plans, and when you wake up, we can talk about going back to the tower." "Hyunji called twice yesterday," he said, with the specific tone of someone who knows they are being redirected and has decided to let it happen. "I know. The bathroom tile supplier pushed back on lead time. I have a solution. I'll handle it." She took the coffee cup out of his hand. "Sleep." He looked at her for a moment, then he went. She stood at the kitchen counter and listened to his footsteps on the stairs, and heard the door of the room at the end of the hall, and then heard nothing, and she stood there alone in the kitchen with the first light coming through the window and the city waking up somewhere beyond the persimmon tree. And she breathed. She was still here. Song Tae-won was handled quietly. Yoon Dae-sung came to Yongin the following afternoon and told Min-jae in the study while Nia was on a call with Hyunji about tile. She heard the low register of the conversation through the wall and did not try to hear the words. When Yoon left an hour later, he passed through the main room, and she was at the table with her laptop, and he stopped. "Miss Holloway," he said. She looked up. He looked at her for a moment with the flat evaluating eyes, and then he said, "The tile supplier in Insadong for the second bathroom. They have a second shipment coming in Thursday. Better lead time than Park Materials." She held very still. 98% of the first option, he said. Not 92. She said, "How do you know about the tile suppliers?" "I know everything about this building," he said. "It's my job." He walked out. She looked at the doorway he had left through for a long moment. Then she opened her laptop and sent Hyun-ji the Insadong supplier contact and told her to call Thursday morning. Yeah. They returned to the tower 6 days after leaving it. The Maritime Authority filing had gone through on day 3. Min-jae had told her matter-of-factly over breakfast, the way you report weather. And the operational response from Chang-Liu had been, per Yoon's monitoring, silence. Not the silence of regrouping, the silence of a door closing. Wei Guochen had other corridors, other interests. The cost-benefit of continuing pressure on Kang Min-jae had shifted below whatever threshold he operated on, and the mechanism had been set down. Nia had sat with that word, mechanism, and then she had let it go. She was not a mechanism. She was a woman who had been briefly useful to someone else's leverage play and was now no longer useful to it, and that was a fact about their intentions, and said nothing about her. She let it go. The penthouse on the day she walked back into it was different than she had left it. Not because anything had changed. The work was exactly where she had left it. The terracotta wall, the limestone counter, the credenza level and solid on its shim. But the light was different, or she was different, or both. She stood in the center of the main living area and turned slowly the way she had on the first day. And what she felt was not the first-day assessment of a professional looking at a problem. It was something closer to recognition. She had made this space breathe. It was still in progress. The primary suite wasn't done. The second bathroom was waiting on tile. The study remained untouched because that was Min-jae's scope to decide whether he was ready for. But what was done was real. It had warmth. It had point of view. It felt, for the first time in 12 years of this building existing, like somewhere a person actually lived. Min-jae came in from the office wing and stopped in the doorway of the main room the way he always did, and she watched him do the same thing she had just done. The slight pause, the re-registration of a space he knew, but that kept being different from what he expected. "The cushions," he said, "arrived this morning. Hyun-ji signed for them." He looked at the sofa. The cushions were a deep, muted green, a complement to the terracotta wall that she had been searching for since week 2, and they were in the right place and at the right scale, and they transformed the sofa from a piece of furniture into something you might actually choose to sit on. "They're right," he said. "I know they're right," she said. "I've been looking for that color for 6 weeks." He crossed the room and sat on the sofa. He sat back against the cushions and looked out through the floor-to-ceiling glass at the Seoul skyline, and she watched him do it. Watched him settle into the space she had made, watched the particular quality of a person who has never known how to be at rest in a room finally finding the approximation of it. She sat beside him, not adjacent, but close. The skyline spread in front of them, mid-afternoon, the city in its working hours with the light coming at the angle that turned the glass towers amber on one side and cool blue on the other. He said, "The primary suite." 2 weeks, she said. "Maybe 10 days if the tile comes through Thursday." "And then?" She looked at the skyline. "And then the project is done," she said. "I go back to Chicago. I rebuild the client list. I use the money from this job to shore up the firm, and then I figure out the next step." He was quiet. "That's the plan I came here with," she said. "It's still the plan." "Is it?" he said. She looked at him. "I'm not asking you to change your plan," he said carefully. "I'm asking if the plan you came here with is still the plan you want." She thought about Chicago, the apartment she had not been back to, the drafting table and the mood boards and the neighbor's cat, the client she needed to rebuild trust with and the industry contacts who had heard Derek's version of things and needed to hear hers. The life she had been constructing for herself before a man in a ballroom in November had looked at her and seen something she hadn't given him permission to see. She said, "I want the firm. That's not negotiable." "I know," he said. "I want the Chicago practice. My own work, my own clients, my own name on things." "I know that too." She turned to look at him directly. "What are you actually asking?" He met her eyes. "I'm asking if Chicago has to be the end of this, or if it can be the next part." She held very still. "I'm not asking you to give anything up," he said. I'm asking if there's a version where you build what you want to build, and I am also part of the frame. A pause. I am aware that I don't know how to do that yet. I'm aware that the domestic version of my life is undeveloped. You burned eggs, she said. I burn everything, he said, with the seriousness of a man making a complete factual disclosure. I have burned everything I have ever attempted to cook. My housekeeper believes this is deliberate, so she will keep coming. She looked at him. She looked at the skyline. She looked at the cushions she had found after 6 weeks of searching and the limestone counter and the wall she had painted the right color on the third try. She said, Seoul half the year, Chicago the other half. He held the stillness he always held when something mattered. The Seoul projects I take on site, she said, working it out as she said it, the way she worked out design problems, out loud, in sequence, following the logic until it arrived somewhere that held. Chicago clients I handle remotely when I'm here. I keep the firm. I keep my name. I expand the practice to include international work, which is where it should have been going anyway. Yes, he said. You come to Chicago when the schedule allows. Yes. And you eat eggs that I make because you cannot be trusted with a stove. That is, he said, a reasonable arrangement. She breathed. She said, This is going to be complicated. Yes, he said. Your world is dangerous. Yes. And I'm not going to pretend it isn't or look away from it, she said. I'm not built for pretending. I know, he said. That's not what I'm asking for. She looked at him one more time. The full look. The one she gave spaces she was committing to. The one that took in every element and assessed the bones of a thing and decided whether it was worth building in. Okay, she said. Then, okay. He reached across and took her hand the way he had not done in the car to Yongin. Not the edge of the hand, not the possibility of contact. Her hand held. They sat in the finished part of the penthouse she had made livable and looked at the city that had tried to use her as a weapon against the man beside her and had failed. And neither of them said anything more because there was nothing more that needed to be said in this particular moment. 1 year later, she came back to the Blackstone. Not in Chicago. The Blackstone Hotel in Chicago had been renamed and rebranded and was now something else. But there was a Blackstone charity gala hosted under the same organizational banner in a new venue on Michigan Avenue, and the invitation had arrived 3 months before through a channel that was no longer the indirect 2 degrees route it had been the first time. She wore the burgundy dress. She had taken it out of the closet 2 weeks before and looked at it for a long time. And then she had taken it to the alterations shop and had the neckline adjusted slightly. The waist let out a 1/4 inch because she had stopped skipping meals when she was anxious. She wore the earrings that were too expensive for most events. She wore her heels. She had 4 active projects in Seoul and 2 in Chicago, and a 3rd Chicago project in discussion with a developer who had seen the penthouse tower feature in an architecture magazine, the public, legitimate version of Min Jae's holdings, and had wanted to know who had done the residential work. Her lawyer had recovered 70% of the joint account funds. The remaining 30% was still in litigation, but her lawyer was not optimistic, and she had decided she was done waiting for it. She had built past it. The money was a fact of a chapter that was over. Min Jae was beside her when they walked in. He did not wear a name tag. He did not need to. The room registered his presence the way rooms always registered his presence. A slight adjustment, a recalibration, the particular quality of attention that moves through a crowd when someone enters who carries weight whether they choose to display it or not. He wore charcoal, because of course he did. She saw Derek from across the room within the first 20 minutes. He saw her at the same moment, and she watched the same sequence play out across his face that she had watched play out in front of the restaurant at Rosalind's and in the ballroom a year before. The recalibration, the construction of an appropriate response, the decision made in real time about what version of himself to present. He came over. She had known he would. He looked older than a year should have made him. The relationship with Chloe was over. Priya had told her months ago without particular satisfaction, just as information. His firm had restructured, which was the word people used when clients left. He was still handsome, still carried himself with the ease of someone who had never had to work very hard for a room's approval, but the ease had something hollow in it now, the way old confidence looks when the thing that fed it has been removed. He said, "Nia, you look incredible." "Thank you, Derek." His eyes moved to Min Jae. He held them there for a moment, and she could see him remembering. The ballroom, the suit, the champagne-stained sleeve, the way Min Jae had said your loss with the casual devastation of someone stating a geological fact. "Good to see you," Derek said to Min Jae, with the particular warmth of someone who does not feel warm. "Hmm?" Min Jae said. Derek looked back at her. He said, with the specific tone of a man who has been sitting with something for a long time and has finally decided to say it, "I made a mistake, Nia. I know that now. I knew it. I think I knew it before I even finished saying it. He stopped. He tried again. "I handled everything badly. The money, the timing, the way I left." She looked at him. She thought about the bathroom floor, the Portugal bookmarks deleted one by one, the card in her clutch that said 4 years feels like the beginning. She thought about all the weight of it, the real weight, not the story version but the actual experience of it at 2 a.m. on cold tile. She said, "I know you did." He waited, perhaps for something else. Absolution, anger, the drama of a reckoning. She gave him neither. "I hope the next thing is better," she said, "for both of us." She meant it. She discovered, saying it, that she genuinely meant it, not as a performance of magnanimity, but as a fact. She did not need him to have suffered. She did not need him to have failed. She needed nothing from Derek Vaughn at all, and the absence of that need was the lightest she had felt in longer than she could calculate. She touched Min Jae's arm and they moved on. Behind them, she did not look back. But 6 months after the gala, Min Jae attempted to cook again. It was a Saturday in Seoul, mid-morning, and Nia was at the drafting table she had installed in what had been the generic study, the one scope she had eventually been given access to, 8 months into the project, when Min Jae had come into the room one evening and looked at it with the expression she now recognized as him deciding something, and had said simply, "This room too." She had taken 3 days to find the right direction for it, and then she had worked faster than any room in the penthouse, because she understood by then what he needed from a space to actually use it. She was reviewing the elevation drawings for the Chicago project when she smelled smoke. She put the drawings down. She went to the kitchen and found him standing at the stove with a pan that had developed ambitions beyond his supervision, and the expression on his face was the expression of a man who had approached the situation with genuine confidence and was confronting the limits of that confidence in real time. She took the pan off the heat. She looked at what was in it. "What were you making?" she said. "Your mother's chicken recipe," he said. "I found it written in the back of your site notebook, the one from the Mapogu warehouse." She looked at him. "I was attempting it," he said, with the precision of someone carefully selecting a past tense. She looked at the pan. She looked at him. She looked at the recipe card she could now see on the counter, her own handwriting, the card her mother had given her when she left for college with the instruction not to lose it. She said, "You've been practicing this." "For 3 weeks, he said, "in the mornings when you're doing site calls." "You've been cooking in secret for 3 weeks. "Attempting," he said again. She looked at the pan, at the card, at him. She said, "Move over." She stood beside him at the stove and they made it together, her correcting the heat and the timing, and him following with the focused attention he brought to everything that mattered to him, and the kitchen filled with the smell of something right, her mother's recipe, the one she had made on Sunday afternoons in the apartment in Chicago when she needed the particular comfort of something familiar. They ate at the counter. The penthouse around them was finished and full of light, and the cushions were the right green, and the window in the primary suite breathed the city, and the study had the right lamp, and the limestone was unmarked, and the terracotta wall was the exact color it had always needed to be. After a while, Min Jae put down his fork. He reached into the pocket of his jacket, which was hanging on the back of his stool, and he set something on the counter between them. She looked at it. It was a ring. Not a large one, but not the kind that announces itself. A single stone, dark and precise, in a setting that was architectural rather than ornamental, the kind of thing designed by someone with a strong opinion about proportion and restraint. She looked at the ring. She looked at him. He said, "I had it made by the craftsman in Gyeonggi province." A pause. "The one who made the credenza." She breathed. "He had strong opinions about the setting," Min Jae said. "I deferred to his judgment. He was correct." She said, "Are you going to ask me something?" He looked at her with the full weight of a face that had stopped managing what it showed, sometime in the past year, around her, in the specific context of moments that mattered. "Nia," he said. Her name, Bear, the way he had said it the first time beside the credenza and every significant time since. "Will you marry me?" Not with the rising inflection of a question, as a statement of intent with a space left for her answer. She looked at the ring on the counter between them, at the chicken her mother had taught her in a kitchen in Chicago, at the man who had tried to make it in secret for 3 weeks and had burned it and tried again and burned it again and kept trying because he had decided it was worth doing. She said, "Yes." He picked up the ring and held it and looked at her hand for a moment before he put it on, the way he looked at things he was committing to, fully, without reservation, the way she had learned to recognize as the most honest thing about him. He put it on her hand. She looked at it. It was the right proportion. The craftsman had been correct. She said, "The next time you attempt something in this kitchen, you tell me first. I don't require assistance." "You burned it for 3 weeks. I was troubleshooting," he said. She looked at him, and the thing behind her eyes was warm and complete, and she did not try to manage it or keep it at a careful distance or name it into something smaller than it was. She said, "I love you." He looked at her. "You don't have to say it back right now," she said. "I know." "Nia," he said. "I know your face," she said. "I know." He reached across and turned her hand over, the one with the ring, and held it palm up for a moment, and then he said it, quietly, without construction, in his precise English with the formal consonants that meant he was being more careful than usual because it mattered more than usual. "I love you," he said. "That is not a calculation," she smiled. Not the small one, not the professional one, not the one she used when she needed to hold a room. The real one. The one she had been withholding for 31 years from anyone who hadn't earned it. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm still here." Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seoul did what it always did. Blazed and moved and breathed in its enormous indifferent beauty, 40 stories below 2 people who had found each other in the wrong moment and stayed through every cost of it. The city didn't notice. It didn't need to. What was built inside those windows, slowly, room by room, argument by argument, 5 in the morning kitchen table by 5 in the morning kitchen table, was not for the city. It was for them. And it was, for the first time in both their lives, exactly enough.